Hello everyone, and welcome to this shortened State of the Cat session where we're going to be looking at the progress to date on Tomcat 10 and Jakarta EE. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Mark Thomas. I've been a Tomcat committer since 2003, and you'll find me contributing on the Tomcat mailing lists under Mark T at Apache.org. I'm also a committer over at the Eclipse Foundation on a number of the Jakarta EE projects that Tomcat is implementing. So let's dive straight in and let's have a look at where we are with Jakarta EE. So we have a Jakarta EE8 release. That's essentially a renamed Java EE8. There aren't any functional changes. There's a bit of cleanup in the Java doc. The TCKs were also renamed in terms of putting Jakarta on the front of them, but the specification documents weren't touched. So Jakarta EE8 still refers to the Java EE8 spec docs. For Jakarta EE9, the plan is really to make a large breaking change, and that's to change the package from JavaX to Jakarta. The reason for that is whilst Oracle donated all of the Java EE source code, spec documents, TCKs, and the like, what they didn't grant were the rights to continue using the JavaX namespace if the Jakarta project wanted to evolve the API. So because we do want to evolve those APIs, then a discussion was held as to, well, what do we do? Do we change it piecemeal, as and when needed? Do we do a big bang approach? Do we try something else? And after a long discussion, the conclusion was that Jakarta EE9 would just do the package rename. And the reason it's limited to just the package rename is that whilst that is obviously a breaking change, as long as it's limited to just the package rename, then that provides an opportunity for automated tools to do that transition from Java EE8 to Jakarta EE9 automatically. If it was allowed to remove deprecated code, do a bit of refactoring, reorganize some methods, maybe add a few new things, take out some stuff that's no longer required. As soon as you start doing that, it pretty much rules out the possibility of an automated migration. And we wanted that possibility to remain. Now, I said there won't be any changes. That's not strictly true. There is scope for minor changes, but only if they're binary compatible. So things like if a method's marked as deprecated in the Java doc, but it hasn't got the deprecated annotation, then we can add that. If a method could or should be using generics and isn't, then we can add generics. But it's those sorts of changes that they're fairly small and they have to be binary compatible. There might be a few of those in some of the APIs. Certainly the projects I'm involved in are looking at doing a couple of little changes like that. The other significant thing in Jakarta EE9 is that we'll also have new specification documents. The text has now arrived for those at Eclipse, and the projects are in the process of converting it, and I'll sort of talk a little bit more about each project as we get there. I think if you asked most people which Jakarta EE specifications Tomcat implements, then most people will be able to name the first four. Some might get Jakarta authentication, but probably wouldn't mention Jakarta annotations and Jakarta debugging support for other languages. So there are actually 7 in total. I'm going to focus on the first 4 because they're sort of the biggest ones and the ones that people are most interested in. The release plan for Jakarta EE9 is to get release candidates out as soon as possible. And the idea of those release candidates is that they are APIs where the package rename and associated changes has been complete. So they're API jars that downstream projects can use to start developing against. So we need to get those out as soon as we can. And the aim is for a final release in June. So looking at the 4 specs that Tomcat's particularly interested in, if we start with Servlet, that package renaming process has been complete. A milestone release is available in Maven Central for downstream projects to use. The specification document arrived in Git this week. The conversion process for those was an automated conversion to ASCII doc. and the end result is a little bit messy, so it needs a fair amount of cleanup to get that into a fit state for release. So work on that has just started, and it's one of the many areas where there's an opportunity to get involved if you're interested. There's been some minor cleanup of the API. There's a bit more planned. There's even discussions of new features. Now, where you can add new features in a binary compatible way, which is effectively if you're adding new interfaces, new classes, and not referencing them from any of the existing code, then it's safe to add those. Whether or not those get added in Servlet 5, Jakarta EE 9, or whether they wait for Servlet 5.1 is still under discussion. I think they're going to end up waiting, but we shall see. So to sum up what's on the to-do list for Servlet, we need to clean up the spec, and we need to update the TCK because obviously all the renaming needs to happen there as well. I need to review the open issues and see which ones we can fix. Generally, those will be around clarifying the spec. What I mean by that is when the spec was originally written, the expert group had an intention and they tried to express that in words in the spec doc. The implementers then implemented that intention, and they were usually the same people, so the intention transferred across, and the TCK tested it, and again, usually the same people involved. However, it wasn't always the case that the words chosen in the spec doc, and I was one of those people, and I'm as guilty of this as anybody else, aren't necessarily as clear as they could have been. So the intention isn't clear, and that has caused, on occasion, confusion downstream. So one of the opportunities we've got is we can clarify the spec document, say, no, this is what is actually meant here. This is what the expert group meant. This is what the reference implementation does. This is what the TCK tests. This is what is expected. And try and sort of clean up some of those points of confusion. So you see, that's what we're trying to pick up in the open issues, really there. And then obviously we need to get the release out. JSP is in pretty much exactly the same position. Minor difference is that the Jakarta debugging support for other languages, that's being treated as part of JSP. And the reason for that is it's that specification that defines how the process works for getting a JSP source code snippet in the error page when you have an error generating a JSP. From memory, that specification is only 2 or 3 pages long, so it shouldn't add a particularly large amount of work to what needs to be done for JSP. So I imagine we'll just pick that up as part of cleaning up the spec. So again, like Servlet, clean up the spec, update the TCK, review the open issues, and get a release out. Jakarta EL, on the other hand, is a bit further along. So rename's complete, got a milestone release. We're actually waiting for the release candidate to migrate to Maven, to get across to Maven Central as I'm talking. The spec doc has been updated, so that's a difference. Cleanup's been done. There's a pull request for the TCK waiting to be submitted. Essentially what that's waiting for is the release candidate to make it through to Maven Central, because the pull request needs to reference the release candidate in the updated TCK. We've reviewed the open issues. A handful of those have been resolved. There's a couple of discussion items still ongoing, so we need to close those out, make any changes if necessary as a result of that, and then get a release. So expression language really is quite close to getting that final release out. And WebSocket, well, it's sort of in between Servlet JSP and expression language, really. So the rename, the milestone has been done, the spec document's been done, but the TCK hasn't, and we haven't reviewed the open issues. So need to get that done, and then we'll be ready to do the release. So that's where we are with Jakarta EE 9. And really, that progress has happened mostly since the beginning of January. So a good amount of progress has been made in a relatively short amount of time. There's a reasonable amount of momentum there, and the June date looks reasonable if you look at it in the context of the individual APIs. Where I get slightly more nervous about that June date is that in order to have a release, you need to have a implementation of the spec. Now, for the individual specifications, that's not too difficult. The Glassfish is the reference implementation, or was the reference implementation for all of them. but we've also got implementations in Tomcat. So for all the specs I'm involved in, we can point to Tomcat as the implementation, assuming it passes the TCK, which by then it should do. And then that's our proven implementation. So ticking the box, we can do the release. Where things are a bit trickier is for the platform spec, because that's essentially the combination of all of the specifications. And that needs a reference implementation that implements everything, which really at the minute, Glassfish is the option. And I'm not seeing quite the same amount of progress updating Glassfish and the implementations as I am on the API side. Now, on one hand, you can't really update the implementations until you've got the APIs, so you might not expect very much. On the other hand, that not seeing much activity sort of generally applies throughout sort of my experience with Jakarta EE to date. So I am a little bit worried that Glassfish won't be ready, or there won't be an implementation at the platform level come June. We've got plenty of time. I might be wrong. So it's by no means certain that there's a problem. It's just at this moment I'd call it sort of a nagging doubt, but we shall see what happens. As I say, there's plenty of time to sort it, so it's not anything I class as a major issue at this point. Moving on to sort of the progress we've made with Tomcat then. When we were sitting down and planning what we wanted to do for Tomcat 10, we had a number of aims. So we wanted to carry on supporting Java EE 8 as long as there was a demand to do so, because what we saw from the community was quite a few people saying, well, I don't particularly need any new features. I don't want to go through what looks like quite a large migration from Java EE to Jakarta EE. I want to stick with Java EE 8, please. So as long as there are people who want to do that, we want to do our best to support them. But equally, there are people that want to migrate to Jakarta EE 9, and that's where the technology is going to evolve, and we want to support people doing that, so we need to support Jakarta EE 9 as well. And finally, accepting that there is going to need to be a migration between the two, we wanted to do what we could to support that process. And all of those together formed the plan that I'm going to sort of talk you through shortly. It's worth noting that there's a couple of other sort of assumptions underlying this. The first assumption is that Jakarta EE 10 is going to follow Jakarta EE 9 fairly quickly. By fairly quickly, that's sort of year-ish. It's quite ish. It could be as little as 6 months. It could be as much as 18. Those are completely finger in the air estimates of time. There hasn't really been much discussion at all of that over at Eclipse. So there's a hefty amount of guesswork there on our part. The second assumption is that people aren't really going to want to switch to Jakarta EE 9 in production. The reason being that it doesn't really get you anything over Java EE 8. It's exactly the same, just in a different package. It's a lot of work to end up in essentially exactly the same place. We see Jakarta EE 9 more as something that gets used in dev and testing, as people either trial migrations to see what's involved or start work on new projects. But those projects are ultimately targeting 10 onwards, because that's where the new features and new functionality is going to be. Like I say, those are our assumptions. If those assumptions are incorrect, then the following plan might not be correct and we'll need to adjust it. But that's fine. The plan is not set in stone. There's plenty of opportunity to change it if we need to. So what we've done so far, we've created a new branch for ongoing maintenance of Tomcat 9, 90X. So that's where Java EE 8 support lives at the moment. And we started development for Jakarta EE 9 on a 10.00x branch. That's master. This is effectively targeting 10.00x. Note the extra zero there. That is deliberate. I'll explain why in a couple of slides. So the work that we've completed on master, Jakarta EE 9 package rename is complete. We've tidied up the Realm API. Remy's tidied up the cache size management for the low level IO, made that a lot cleaner, a lot more sensible. And we've also been through the code base, and anywhere where it says deprecated, this will be removed in Tomcat 10 onwards, we've done that and we've removed it. There's still quite a few things to do, and in terms of what we sort of view as Tomcat 10 API changes. There's a file in the top of the repo in the master branch called Tomcat Next. And in there's a list of all the things we'd like to do. It's about 15, 16, I think, altogether. So those are still all on the to-do list, still to be done. And again, another opportunity to have a look at what's on that list and help out if you wish. We've been discussing end of life for Tomcat 7. We haven't finalised a date yet, but the date that's been discussed is the 31st of March 2021, and there haven't been any objections to that. So I'm expecting that we'll send the notice out for that sometime in February. And that's consistent with what we've said in the past, that we will always give at least 12 months notice of the end of life of any major Tomcat version. The other work is monthly releases. So we'll be starting monthly releases of 10.00x. Those will be milestone releases because we always release things as milestones until the specs are final, and continue with the 9 and 8.5 releases. There weren't any monthly releases in January. That was simply because the December ones were a little bit late. Then everybody was away, or at least not contributing because of the holiday period. And by the time we got to the beginning of January, there wasn't really a great deal of work to include in a release. So as we often do, we skip the January release and we'll start that up again in February. And I'm expecting to start those at the beginning of next week. So we'll continue on that monthly release cycle up until the point where Jakarta EE9 is released. Shortly after that, we'll release Tomcat 10.000. And that will be a Jakarta EE9 implementation that passes the TCKs, and support for 10.00x will continue on master. And then we'll continue on our monthly release cycle up until the point where Jakarta EE10 work starts. At that point, we'll create a 10.00x branch, and maintenance of 10.00x will continue on that branch, and then master will become the development branch for Jakarta EE10. And then we continue on that basis for a while until we reach the point where Jakarta EE10 is released. We'll release Tomcat 10.01, and then support for 10.0x will continue on master. At that point, we will stop support for 10.00x, which is Jakarta EE9. So in a deviation from our normal way of doing things, we're not planning on supporting Jakarta EE9 beyond the point where Jakarta EE10 is available. And that is primarily, as I said before, we see it as a transition release that we don't think people are going to be using in production. So if that assumption is wrong, then we'll rework this plan and come up with a different approach. At the same time as we release Tomcat 10.01, we're also going to create a Tomcat 9.x branch, and this is a new thing. And the way we'll do that is we'll start with master, which will be Tomcat 10. We'll then revert any API changes in the Jakarta APIs, and we'll revert the JavaX to Jakarta package rename. What that will leave you with is a version of Tomcat that has all the features of Tomcat 10, the internal API of Tomcat 10, but implements the Java EE8 API, and that will be Tomcat 9.10x. So that's how we're intending to continue support for people that want Java EE8, but also want to access ongoing support and new Tomcat features and so on. So we'll then be supporting 10.0x on master, within the 9.10 branch, the 9.0 branch, and the 8.5 branch. Then that will continue until work starts on Jakarta EE11. Then we create the 10.0x branch, work on Tomcat 10 continues there. We plan end of life for Tomcat 8.5, and master becomes development branch for Java EE11. You can see how this pattern is going. I'll just finish it off. We get to a Jakarta EE11 release, so we release Tomcat 11.00. We then create the 9.11 branch, again, same way as we did before. Revert any API changes, revert package rename, and you're left with a version of Tomcat that has all the features of Tomcat 11, the internal API of Tomcat 11, but implements the Java EE8 API. And then we continue to support that. At the same time, we stop supporting 9.10. So this special version of 9 that sort of tracks the newer Tomcat internal APIs but provides support for Java EE8, we're only ever going to be supporting one version of that. So as a new Tomcat release comes along, we create a new version of that, and then support stops for the old one. So I'll have 11 support on master, 10 support will continue on 10.0x, and 9 support will continue on 9.0x, and so on. And eventually we reach the end state. And this is true where n is greater or equal to 12. Tomcat n, which will be on a master branch, that will support Jakarta EEN. Then we'll have a n-10x branch that will support Jakarta EE n-1, same for n-2. And there'll be a 9.n.x branch where we support Java EE8, but with the latest Tomcat APIs. And all of that is set out on the wiki as well. If anything about that isn't clear, or you've got any other questions, then please do ask them on the Tomcat mailing list. We'll be happy to answer them. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about the migration tool. It's available from GitHub. We haven't had a release yet, but it's dead easy to build. At the moment, it only handles the specifications that are supported by Tomcat, but it essentially does package matching with a regular expression. So to expand it to the other Jakarta EE packages, just to tweak the regular expression. So there's a good opportunity there for somebody to contribute to the project with a nice, easy pull request if they wish. We've already used it. If you're not aware, Tomcat uses JSTL API and implementation in the examples web application, and we also use it in our unit tests. Now, because they're actually a Tomcat project, or at least our versions of them are, we've got the source code for that, but we didn't use the source code to do the conversion. What we did was we took the API and the implementation jars, we ran them through the migration tool, and that gave us new jars where all the references to JavaX and those APIs have been inserted to Jakarta. We've tested it, and it seems to be working quite happily. We do want to test it with more complex applications. So if you've got an app that runs on Java EE8 that you want to try it with, then please do so and let us know. Best of all, if it doesn't work, let us know and give us a patch that fixes it. That would be great. I do want to try testing it with Jira. That's sort of like my ultimate test case. I haven't had a chance to do that yet. I'm expecting there'll be a little bit more work. There'll be some file formats that we haven't quite handled that will need handling. I also don't know how long it's going to take to do it, because Jira is quite a large web application, much bigger than anything we've tested it on so far. So we'll have to see how that goes, but that's a target. So I think that brings us to the end. Just having a look, we've got a couple of questions that came in during the live presentation of this. So let's have a quick look at that. Can we use the API jars produced by Eclipse rather than producing our own? Yes, we can. They're licensed under the EPL, which I believe is a license we're allowed to use on a binary basis or a don't change the source code basis. So yes, we could use those API jars. Question is, do we want to? On the plus side, it's less work once we've got them in. Don't need to maintain anything. On the downside, it's less flexibility, because we tend to be fairly close to the cutting edge of the spec implementations, and sometimes we implement stuff in Tomcat to try it out to see how it works before feeding that back into the spec. Then being able to modify the spec APIs locally is often quite useful. So we need to sort of weigh those up and decide which side of that line we want to come down on. A sort of minor issue is difference in licensing. Is there some benefit to the wider community to having Apache licensed versions of those jars? Don't know. Possibly that would be another factor we need to take into consideration. Follow-up question, can we just copy and paste all the Java doc? Not sure. Don't think so, because I think we're on I think that comes under source modification. We need to look at that in more detail. It would certainly be nice if we could do that. Maybe there's something we can do in terms of linking to the official Java doc rather than our internal. And then that begs the question, why are we even maintaining our own versions? That very much a discussion for the mailing list, so let's continue that there. I'm not seeing any other questions, so If you're watching the recording of this and you do have questions, please do feel free to contact us on the Tomcat mailing lists. We'll be more than happy to answer any questions you've got there. Thank you very much for listening.